Today's topic is the art of indifference. It is direct to people who want to live an unfamiliar life, as it talks about the traumas that he felt, and that a person doesn't necessarily have to be positive all the time, as the key to happiness and strength is in dealing with adversity better. In the chapters of the book, The Art of Indifference, it deals with how a person overcomes the obstacles of his life in a logical way, away from evasion and fear of them. And that we realize our fears, shortcomings, and what we are not sure of, and that we stop evading and fleeing from all of this and start confronting the painful truths so that we are able to find what we are looking for in terms of courage, perseverance, honesty, responsibility, tolerance, and love for knowledge. Not everyone can be superior in society, successful and unsuccessful. Part of this reality is not fair and it's not the result of your fault. It is true that money is a good thing, but your interest in what you do with your life is much better. Experience is the real wealth. It is a moment of real, honest talk to someone who grabs you by the shoulders and looks you in the eye. Don't try. In this chapter of the book, The Art of Indifference, the writer talks about the hero of a story who struggles for what he wants, never gives up, and then finally achieves his craziest dreams, except that after he passed away. He wrote on his grave, "Don't try." Happiness is a problem. In this chapter of the book, The Art of Indifference, the writer talked about the hero of a story who struggles for what he wants, never gives up, and then finally achieves his craziest dreams, and talks about a young prince who lived all kinds of comfort and then went out to the world to know true suffering, to finally be a Buddha. You are not special. This chapter is a new story for an energetic person who sees life in front of him, is positive and values himself to the fullest extent, that he is an important person in his perspective and all people need him, and he has a list of the names of important and famous people around the world who have dealt with him and sought his advice. He doesn't stop talking about himself, except in fact, it is not that much, but much less than that. He is still attached to his parents, sucking their money for fun, parties and living, just as his uncles and aunts were not spared from his financial requirements. He pursues business owners to share with them and insists on them to give him an opportunity to give a speech in front of the audience without knowing what to say. And when you criticize him, he describes you as ignorant and stupid, who is jealous of him and his successes. The value of suffering. The Japanese lieutenant who was told by the emperor during America's war on Japan to fight to the last breath and not surrender made him not believe anything related to the end of the war, and that they leave the jungles of Pauling to return to their country, where he remained 30 years after that, hiding in the jungle, causing panic to the owners of the place and killing 2 of his friends for nothing, except for living on insects and rodents, sleeping on the dirt, and endless suffering. You are always choosing. If you find yourself unhappy in your current situation, it is very likely that that feeling is caused, at least in part, by something beyond your control. It is not a choice on your part, but when we feel that, we have chosen our problems. We feel mastery over them, as if we have been charged with a new energy. When we feel that our problems are imposed on us against our will, we see ourselves as miserable and we see ourselves as victims. You are wrong about everything. The writer says in the chapter, I have been wrong in every step of my path. I have been wrong in everything throughout my life. I have been wrong in relation to myself, others, society, culture, the universe, and everything. Failure is the path to progress. If someone is better at something than you, it is much more likely that they fail it than you. And if someone is worse than you, it is probably because of the pain of a long learning process that you have gone through. That is what explained by the writer who gave an example of a young child learning to walk. How much will he fall to succeed in the end? The importance of saying no failure is the way forward. In this chapter, the writer talks about the boy who decided to taste another taste of life, far from his homeland. And unlike his friends who got married and have their own families and their own work, he decided to travel to 55 countries for work, pleasure, and the experience of freedom, only to realize after all those visits that freedom is beautiful, but it's meaningless, to not wail. And after his visit to Russia, whose people are characterized by frankness without compliments, which made him take a lesson from them, which is to be frank and honest in expressing his feelings, and he shouldn't torture himself at the mercy of the opinions of others. And then you die. In the last chapter, the writer talks about the end of life and that the lesson is that our life is not a mere coincidence. Certainly, there is some purpose in our existence, but you can straighten it more. With your hand, you can create the purpose. With your death, you will think that everything will end. But the story of your immortality, you can write it. You can make others remember you by doing something, by developing something that enters encyclopedias scientific with a human act, which makes you remember many people whose lives you changed. Quote, "We are not all exceptional. The value of honesty is important, as the value makes you know yourself more, makes you know your advantages and disadvantages. Self-development lies in not being afraid of failure, and that the more you fail, the more you will be able to go through experiences and projects more and more. Don't try. Genius is not in overcoming impossible obstacles, nor in self-development, but in being completely honest with yourself. Pain and loss are inevitable, and we must stop trying to resist them. Happiness is a kind of logical process." Anxiety and dissatisfaction are inherent part of human nature and are necessary to create stable happiness. That panda will be the hero none of us want, but we all need. Life itself is a kind of suffering, which the rich suffer because of their wealth, the poor suffer from because of their poverty. Those who don't have a family suffer from it because they don't have a family, and those who have a family suffer from it because they have a family. This doesn't mean that all kinds of suffering are all equal. Certainly, there is suffering more painful than another, but despite that, we all have suffering. Suffering is biologically useful. It is nature's means to induce change. Say no. Reject what you see that keeps you away from what you want. No one wants to stay in a relationship that doesn't make him happy, and no one wants to stay in a job he hates and doesn't believe in. Pain helps us see what is good for us and what is bad, helps us understand our limits and not cross them, and suffering is the impetus for change. How do you get happy? Happiness comes from solving problems. It is a form of action. It is an activity and not some magical thing falling from the sky. Failure is the path to progress. The more you fail and try, the more you will be able to engage in experiments and projects. Mistake is part of the process of self-development. Where does motivation come from in human life? From action. You have to do something, even if it's small, until the inspiration comes to you to do something bigger and so on. There is no exceptional person, neither me nor you. There is no special person. The excessive sense of distinction makes you forget the feeling of others around you. Don't deceive yourself with that. Studies show that the association between happiness and material success quickly approaches zero after one is able to provide for one's basic materials need. You are really great. You are not great because you invented the app for the iPhone, nor because you managed to finish your studies before others. You are really great because you are able to face endless confusion and in the face of inevitable death. That's what makes indifference good. That's why not caring too much will save the world, and you will save it by accepting that the world is a bad place. And that is okay because the world has always been and always will be. Traveling is a great tool for self-development because it takes you away from the values of your cultures and makes you see that there's another society that can live with completely different values and succeed in that without the individuals hating themselves. The only way to feel comfortable with death is to understand yourself and see yourself as something greater than yourself, and to choose values that extend beyond your own time. Simple, direct values that you can control and that can tolerate the chaos of the world around you. Or you have so much guilt over every mistake that you make that you begin to feel guilty about yourself for having so much guilt.